Hi, UMA students. Welcome to your last video about Chapter 2, Multicultural Therapeutic Communication. I am your UMA instructor, Vicki Weissman, and I'm here to summarize all the information you've heard in the last 5 or so videos. We have been talking about multicultural therapeutic communication, why it's important to learn about, what cultures are, what multicultural communication is. We've learned about different focuses on time, present, future, past focus. We've learned about different religions, dietary restrictions, therapeutic considerations, auditory barriers, language barriers that you need to overcome in order to be a good communicator in the healthcare setting. Basically, in summary, we want to be good communicators when we work in a healthcare environment. To be a good communicator, you need to be aware that people are coming from all different cultures and backgrounds. So this chapter, this week in the course, is summarizing all that information for you so you can have a good handle, maybe things you might have heard about but you wanted to learn more about. So with that being said, let me go ahead and share my, okay. So here we are, Chapter 2, Multicultural Therapeutic Communication. What have we learned in Chapter 2? Well, we're going to go back to the beginning, the why. Why is intercultural communication important? Well, as this picture shows, we have a cute little doggy and a cute little kitty cat. They're both unique. They both know how they like to communicate and how they like things done. They might have some similarities and they might have some differences. And in order for them to get along, they have to bridge and make connections between their similarities and their differences, and also keep an open mind so they can understand them and they can understand each other and have these nice little smiles on their faces like you see here. So that's just a cute little example. So what is culture and cultural diversity? Let's just review this for a minute. Culture is a shared way of living by a group of people. It's something you might not think about too much, but when you think about your family maybe, and your aunts and your uncles and your grandparents, maybe neighbors or other people in your community, maybe a religious organization you're a part of, or some sort of group you belong to, you might have a shared way that you live, and these shared ways can bring about shared religions, beliefs, values, language, traditions, manners, objects that are passed from generation to generation. These things can be very important to us. We might not even realize how important and how embedded they are in us. Within each race, there may be many different cultures. So just on a race level, you might have so many different cultures. I mean, just with people who are white, you can have many different religions. You can have many different backgrounds in terms of people from the north and people from the south and people who live out west. So there's many different cultures within a certain race. Cultural diversity then takes that information and puts it together into a framework called multiculturalism, where we take all those different cultures and we mix them up and we make a big melting pot, which is like our country, the United States of America. So within our country, as I'm sure you are all aware, there is a lot of diversity, and as healthcare providers, we need to be aware of this diversity and sensitive to it. Okay, so when we have multicultural therapeutic communication, it can be difficult sometimes. we can have a wall between us where we just are not understanding. So we need to be informed, which is what we're trying to do here at UMA, informing you about these different beliefs and values, trying to recognize these barriers that can be between us, and develop techniques to break down the barriers, break down that brick wall, so that we can really understand one another. So we've looked in this chapter at the Purnell model to define cultural expectations. And the Purnell model really breaks down different ways that the culture can make up parts of our communication, like our culture and how that culture kind of defines communication, family roles in healthcare, healthcare practices, healthcare practitioners, and spirituality. For example, with communication, the culture can be what language is spoken. For family roles in healthcare, you might think of the head of the household, who's in charge of the household and making decisions. For healthcare practices, you can look at the focus of the healthcare. Do you follow Western medicine? Do you follow Eastern medicine? What kind of prescriptions are you willing to take? For healthcare practitioners, you'll look at the perception of practitioners. Are they accepted, or people rather just not go to the doctor at all? And then there's spirituality in health, prayer, meaning of life. Some of these things are very important to us and make those thoughts help determine what kind of health care treatment we might seek out. So with cross-cultural communication, we can have different communication based on the context of the speech, our body language. You can have low context communication, which is very explicit, highly detailed language where you're just being very straightforward. You're not using idioms, you're not talking in slang, you're just being very direct and to the point. Then you can have high context communication where people use their bodies a lot and they reference different objects in the room, and they might use certain phrases that are known within their culture but maybe other people don't know. So that's different ways people can communicate. You can also have different caregiver structures. How much is a family involved in the healthcare? When you work in an office, you might come in or have a patient come in and it's just them. Nobody else is there. And then another person might have their whole family with them. So because of that, you might need to have special efforts to comply with HIPAA so the person's privacy is being protected. Then you have people who focus on different time, the future, the present, the past. Different age groups sometimes have different focuses. The older people and the younger people might be thinking more of the present, like what's going on today, while adults might be looking more at the future. So these are different ways people look at healthcare and how those parts of them can affect how they communicate. So we have many different examples of ethnic culture, which you've learned about this week: Caucasian, African American, African or Caribbean, Asian, Native American, Hispanic, Judaism, and then religious groups. You can have Judaism, who keep kosher, Hinduism and Buddhism that are vegetarians, Islam, they also have dietary restrictions and daily prayers, and Christian Science, which illness and suffering is illusory. Sorry, it's a hard word to pronounce. But basically, they might not believe in healthcare as much as other people, or like their healthcare in a different way than maybe Western Caucasians have their healthcare. So these ethnic cultures and religious cultures can affect how we look at healthcare. So as I talked about in another video, there's barriers to multicultural therapeutic communication. There can be a lack of knowledge. There can be fear and distrust, which can be around. A lot of people now there's anti-vaxxers who are fear and distrustful of vaccines, which has been a new thing in my lifetime. When I was a kid, people got their vaccines. Nowadays, people want to have more information. Racism can play a part in a barrier to communication. Bias, prejudice, ethnocentrism, belief that one's cultures and traditions are better than those of another. There can be stereotyping, certain healthcare rituals, language can pose a barrier, and different perceptions and expectations can pose barriers. So that's a lot of information that was gone, but this is a nice little summary for you to remember these things that can be coming in when somebody walks into an office and you meet a new patient, some of the barriers that could affect your relationship. And so you as the provider need to be aware of these things so you can do a good job trying to break down these barriers. We want to remind you about the ADA, the American with Disabilities Act, it helps overcome language barriers in physical settings, but also with speech and language concerns, and having different devices or methods to help people with disabilities understand and communicate in a healthcare setting. We also talk about using a translator, an interpreter, different translator systems on the computer, like Google Translate or FaceTime or Skype, that can help with the language barriers and breaking them down. So the therapeutic response, how do you want to provide therapy? You want to develop the knowledge of cultures. You want to really, if you work in an office and you find that there's a lot of people from let's just say Puerto Rico, where I live, there's been a lot of people who have moved to my area from Puerto Rico. So maybe I want to really study up on Puerto Rican culture so I can better understand the patients coming into my office. You want to understand their communication style. Maybe they speak with their hands more. Maybe they talk a little louder. And to me, that might be like, oh, wow, are they yelling at me? But no, they're not yelling at me. That's just the way they communicate. How much have they assimilated into the culture? If it's somebody who just moved here a few months ago, they might not have assimilated very much at all, and they might have differences of opinion just based on the healthcare treatment, just based on the culture, and not necessarily being assimilated to our United States culture. The immigration status can also affect somebody's communication. If they're, nowadays, if they're scared of people finding out what their immigration status is, they might be less forthcoming with information that you need as a healthcare provider. So you want to create a comfortable atmosphere so you can have strong communication, and you want to approach the client slowly and respectfully so that you can develop a good rapport with them. You can build trust and demonstrate empathy, and hopefully with that they will communicate more freely with you. You want to recognize and respect their nonverbal mannerisms. Like I said, if they're talking with their hands, consider using an interpreter if there's a language barrier. Maybe if you don't speak Spanish and a patient comes in who's Spanish speaking, maybe there's someone else in your office who does, or maybe they've brought a family member with them. Ask clients for their views on the illness. Don't just assume that whatever you say goes. Get some input from them. Use reflecting questions or statements so you're not just like, this is what we're going to do. Say, is that okay with you? Or, what did you hear me tell you? Just so you know that they're listening to you and getting the information from you correctly. You want to give sufficient time in your appointment. You want to be respectful of dietary rules and regulations a person might be living by, as well as their folk customs. And lastly, you don't want to jump to any conclusions. You want to keep an open and honest line of communication throughout the visit. So in summary, we want to make sure that you understand what the differences are around us. I know that you've learned a lot this week, but it's important information, and I'm sure that wherever you go to work, you are going to see examples of this, and you'll be like, oh yeah, I learned that in my UMA course. You want to be accepting of people's differences and identify the barriers that keep us from communicating and providing adequate care. And just remember, this isn't something that you learn automatically. Each person that you work with, it's going to be a little different. But the more you do it, the more you keep an open mind, the better you'll get at it. Like the old saying says, practice makes perfect. So diversity is the one true thing we have in common. Celebrate it every day. I think that's a good way to end this chapter, to remember these beautiful words and just be embracing to all the different people that you're there to help as a healthcare provider. So as always, if you do have any questions about this video, please reach out to your UMA instructor or academic services. We are here for you and we want you to succeed. And you can take this information and reflect on it to help you with your work this week. You can use this content, material in your readings, interactives in the course room, and research of your own, including information from the UMA library and other reliable sources to maximize your learning on this subject matter. So I hope you learned a lot in this week about multicultural therapeutic communication, and I look forward to seeing you on a video soon. Have a great day.